Hey, right. It's quiet tonight. Anyone else coming? Yeah, Martin's here. Martin's here. Okay. Okay, so we were up to we're up to the sugya of Godrus. Godrus is a very, very interesting sugya, the question of things that move around and how you can establish chazaka. We're going to start the sugya again to make sure we understand it properly. It's halfway down, or just under half, just a bit more than halfway down, 2/3 of the way down on Lamed Vav and Aleph. The Mishnah says that you can have established chazaka over avodim 3 years. Cheskes Gimel Shanim applies to avodim, applies to servants. Gemora says avodim yeshlem chazaka. How can you say that avodim, that servants have chazaka? Godrus ein lahem chazaka. Godrus, things that move around, you cannot establish chazaka over. Rava says ein chazaka la'alta v'yeshlem chazaka la'achar Gimel Shanim. Rava says the answer is there's no chazaka immediately, but there is chazaka after 3 years. So let's see the Rashbam. Rashbam is 5 lines where it gets, it's just 5 lines after it gets wide. Godrus in chazaka. Godrus zone, flocks of sheep, anything that goes and moves around on a way, public ways and marketplaces. Anything that you could say, where it's possible for a person to challenge and say it just walked in of its own accord, or you encouraged it to enter your house because it moves, it walks, it moves around of its own accord. All these cases, they're chazakta, and then you establish chazaka. Ein chazaka is not chazaka. And he can't say, I bought it. It's not possible to say that. Servants can walk around everywhere. It's not the Islam chazaka. And the Mishnah says that has chazaka. The Mishnah says it has chazaka. So the simple understanding and explanation seems to be that there is a fundamental flaw in chazaka, right? If the animal, or let's say an animal, right, can get in of itself, by itself, because that itself disturbs your claim of ownership. With chazaka, we're building up a claim. You don't have any documentation, so we build up a claim. Claim is, I had it 3 years, no one objected, therefore, probably, and I'm saying you a story that I bought it, etc., and no one objected. Therefore, I claim it to be mine. But if that argument is flawed because the animal, there's another story, or at least an equally plausible story, which the other guy who's claiming that he owns it and didn't sell it to you, he can throw at you an equally plausible story, such as, you never bought this at all. This just walked into your land, and you've got a big estate, and you happen to find a few sheep that have been living in the corner of your estate for a few years, unbeknownst to you, and you're claiming you own them, right? That's not a legitimate ownership claim, and therefore that's why there's no chazaka. Now, the assumption assuming is that seems to imply no chazaka at all. Now, that's a problem because our Mishnah says you can establish chazaka. So Rava's answer is, when is there no chazaka? That's only immediately. Someone who has a chazaka, establishes chazaka in them, or takes hold of them literally in his own house, he cannot claim that he bought it without edim, without witnesses, without proof, like other movable items, which can't move, and are not made to, they're not things that you usually lend out or rent out. In all these cases, that means regular movable items, like a cup or whatever it is, a person is believed to say that I bought it. Since it's in his house, because other movable items will be chazaka la'alta. It's a chazaka immediately, right? Someone who is machzik in them, he can say, it's mine, I bought it. Yeah, that's how it is. That all the Rasham is just doing there is establishing for us the basic principles of right? If I have something that's a regular movable item, anything that exists in my house is not karka, it's not mitzvah, etc., right? I can say there's a chazaka immediately, right? It's mine. You claim it's yours, prove it, right? Yeah. Unless it's something which is normally rented out or lent out, there'll be exceptions, but the basic principle is that if I have something in my property, if I walk into Jeremy's house and says, his plasma television, is mine, right? Yeah. If I say that, right, what's Jeremy going to say? Prove it. It's sitting in my house because it's mine, right? And therefore, this is the principle. Movable bits. What is that? No, it means as opposed to karka. It's a bit confusing because we're saying movable things. Okay, it's an awkward term in the context of this because it means movable things. Lataltel, like on Shabbos, it means carry. Okay, so it means things that you can move. That's what it means. Things that can be moved, as opposed to karka. And therefore, do you establish chazaka? You do. You get chazaka immediately. What's the practical example? Anything in your house is assumed to be yours. Yeah, anything in your house is assumed to be yours. Why? Because it's in my possession. It's in my house. It's not like karka. It's not like land. Land is different. Land you need to. Yeah. No, so we're making a distinction. There's a distinction of the house itself and the things in the house. The things that are in your house are chazaka immediately. They're yours, right? Unless I can prove they're not otherwise, right?
No, but it comes to prove that the land is yours as well because it's on the land.
No. The land is different. The land, you need stronger proof that it's yours. Either because you've got proof of purchase. Again, if no one objects to if no one rings your doorbell and says, please, can I have my house back? Then we're not going to disturb your ownership of the house, right? No. Two totally separate things. They work by two totally separate principles. No, they work by two totally separate principles. Nothing to do with each other, nothing to do with it. It's talking about establishing ownership. When it comes to something that's a movable item, right? Like a piece of anything that's inside your house, we assume it's yours. It's what's called chazaka la'alta. Immediately it's yours, unless someone else claims it's theirs. Let them prove it, right? You don't need any 3 years or anything like that, right? When it comes to land, you need a stronger proof. If I'm claiming it's mine and I don't have any proof of ownership, right? To establish that ownership, I need a proof. What proof am I going to have? I'm going to have 3 years using it and no one objected. That's a proof it's mine.
My question was based on the fact that you have this movable items on the land.
No, you're making it too complicated, Jeremy. Jeremy, two worlds. Forget them. Don't mix them up. No, they don't coincide.
So you never had one item.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It's two totally. Yeah, that's fine. It's two totally separate things. Two different ways of proving ownership. No. Two totally separate ways of proving ownership. Tractor on the land. No, tractor's not.
I'm living in a house with my couch.
Yeah.
And I don't have necessarily a chazak on that.
Right.
This is a couch.
Okay, that's yeah. What was that? No, that's
a cover frame. Surely you don't have the house and other things in it.
Yeah, if you can establish a little bit. So the fundamental question there would be who owns the house. Obviously, if we've established that you own the house, you can then say on the things in the house, right? Presumably, yeah. Why not? But what we're saying here is that what we're saying here is so when we say, so Rabbi says like this, when Reish Lakish, he explains Reish Lakish. When Reish Lakish said that that servants and flocks of sheep and things like all these things that can walk themselves, they can move themselves because they're living beings, right? And therefore your chazaka is fundamentally flawed and is disturbed because how are you gonna prove it was maybe it came in its own accord, right? That was only he was only going so far as to say that therefore you don't have chazaka immediately. However, there is chazaka for servants and godress after 3 years, because at the end of 3 years, right, the person who is objecting should have objected. The person who's complaining, the person who's saying, these are yours, not mine, he should have made a fuss. He didn't make a fuss. That's a proof of ownership, even though they walk around by themselves. Who? Well, he would have heard. In other words, what the way Rav is resolving this is as follows. Our Mishnah says, Avodim Yeshnam Chazaka after Gimel Shanim. That servants, you can establish Chazaka after 3 years. Right? That's what our Mishnah says, right? Those who have just joined, we are 2/3 of the way down on Amud Vov Amud Aleph, and we are just going back over the little bit we did at the end of last week to new sugya. The new sugya, it's very simple. The Mishnah says, it's not simple at all, actually. The Mishnah says, that's, it's okay. It's okay, no, it's okay. The Mishnah, it's okay, what? It's ostensibly, so I said it's famous sugya, yeah. The Mishnah said that you can establish chazaka on your servants after 3 years. Same as land. Avodim hukshul kakros. Generally, we see avodim the same as land. There are lots of ways we see that in Kiddushin elsewhere. Avodim you establish like 3 years. After 3 years, you establish chazaka. The Gemora asks, how can that be? Surely things that move around, there's no chazaka. So Rav's resolution is, it's true. There's no chazaka immediately. They don't have the status of chattel. That's the word. Chattel is the word. Did you say chattel? That's right. Chattel is a fancy word for metalton. Metalton. Things that can be moved. Yeah, that's right. Metalton. Yeah, metalton. That is it doesn't have that. Can't chazaka immediately, but you can have chazaka after 3 years. After 3 years, I can establish chazaka, and that's what our Mishnah means. And that's what our Mishnah says. After 3 years, right? That's what the Mishnah. That's what the Gemora says. That's what the Gemora says. Just want to see this second. So have a look at the on your side of your Gemara. There's a little. If you could look in the Gemara, if you look in the real side of the Gemara as opposed to the Arshkol, there's a little aleph in the Rashbam. Can you see the aleph? Can you see the aleph? Did you notice the aleph? You know where the aleph goes to? Not that one. In the Gemara it does this. So, yeah, exactly. It goes to Agos HaGros. What does the Gros say? The web link. What? Yeah, the Agos HaGros says Rashbam de Maskal Mashani Avliyesh v'Chol Shulchan Aruch Siman Ayin Beis Beis. Don't know what that is. I don't know. Siman Kuf Lamed Hey. V'Rambam Shulchan Aruch Siman Kuf Lamed Hey Kosvu Avodim Levad. Right? Very cryptic. Vilna Gaon is always very, very concise. What does the Vilna Gaon say? That if you look in the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, it's in the Kuf Lamed Hey, Moshe Mishpat, you will see that they say only Avodim you can establish chazaka after 3 years. Not sheep, not other things that walk around. There's a major difference. The Rashbam says that when Rava gives his answer, which is, how do you resolve this problem that you can't establish chazaka on things that move on the one hand, and our Mishnah says you can after 3 years, the resolution is that Reish Lakish didn't mean that you can't have chazaka at all. He just meant that it needs 3 years, right? That's how the Rashbam answers it. But according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, says the Vilna Gaon, the Vilna Gaon says no. He was only providing a solution. The Gemara was only finding a solution for avodim, for servants. Avodim, right? Avodim you can establish chazaka after 3 years. Avodim have a separate category, but we're not fiddling with what Reish Lakish said. And Reish Lakish says that sheep, there's no chazaka at all, right? Because they move around. There's no chazaka at all, according to what the Vilna Gaon is saying. At all. Pardon? Maybe. Yeah, he's disagreeing with the Rashba. He's disagreeing. Yeah, Vilna Gaon would disagree with anyone. That's only slightly funny. Vilna Gaon famously is he is unafraid of arguing with Rishonim. Where's this? Kuf. I just want to find it. Jeremy, just because I mentioned the plasma television. That's a joke. Kuf Lamed Hey. Here, Kuf Lamed Hey. No. That, where's that? In the Rashbam. Yeah, you got to find the Hagos Hagro.
I've got the Hagos Hagro.
The Aleph is in the Rashbam. halfway down the bold, the long. That's it. It's always interesting. Yeah, it's always interesting discovering new things on the Daf of the Gemara. Every so often you have the comment on the goal, not very often. So the Shulchan Aruch says. This is din hamachzik v'alichai. Even though someone who establishes a chazak or something that moves, he is believed to say that it's his. Al behema v'chai, meaning metalzel, as in not moved by itself, but movable chattels, right? Al behema v'chai einu nem. On an animal is not believed. The kivon shehi mahaleches, since it walks around, we have to be concerned that maybe it went in of its own accord. Maybe he grabbed it on the way, on the road, and he may establish, and he was machzik in it. Okay, then he goes on to say that what happens if the ma'arer has witnesses that it's his? Nishba heses v'notel, he can make a shvur drabonon and he can take it if he's got eidim that belongs to him. And if he doesn't have eidim, nishba hamachzik heses, the machzik makes a shvur drabonon. That's a shvur heses. The person who's holding it, he makes a shvur, right? V'omed b'shalai, and he can keep what he wants. Keep it. That shvur heses is the shvur drabonon. Sometimes the rabbonon impose shvur. So in other words, the shvur saying, well, okay, what's the solution? The answer is, if I have eidim that it's mine, I have to make a shvur drabonon, and I can take it from you. Okay, these sheep. If I don't have eidim, and I want to say, me holding the sheep, because I have to make a shvur drabonon, so make a shvur as well, right? And I can keep what I want. Okay, then he goes on to give some other details, which I think will come into the Gemara. Okay, so we'll leave that for the moment. Then he says, the Ramah says, v'yesh omrim. Some say, dim hechazik wahem gimel shonim, v'chol inyan havi chazak. That if you have machazik in them 3 years, in every scenario it's chazak. Says the Ramah, it says here, that is the opinion of the Rashbam. Right? That is the opinion of the Rashbam. That the answer that's given in the Gemara was also a resolution for flocks of sheep as well, right? That's what the Ramah. So the Ramah here quotes the Rashbam, right? Quotes the Rashbam. Now the next sif says, Evet Kanani Godol Dino Kibahim. Sif base. There's only 2 sifim in this whole simon. Evet Kanani Godol Dino Kibahim. An Evet Kanani as an adult has the same din as an animal. And he only has chazaka after 3 years, because he can walk around. Okay, and he says the Ramah adds, he has to bring from the Rambam. He has to bring a raya that he's served him for 3 years, like the way an Eved normally serves his master. That's how you establish 3 years with an Eved. 3 years of normal servitude, right? That's the Shulchan Aruch. Then he goes on to talk about a baby Eved. We haven't done that yet, a baby Eved. So that you see from here that the Shulchan Aruch holds like this is what the Vilna Gaon was saying. The Shulchan Aruch's view and the Rambam as well is that actually we're not changing anything about sheep, right? We're not changing anything about sheep. Sheep you can never establish chazak. Only avodim can you establish chazak after 3 years. Right. Why should that be? Avodim. What do you mean? No, they're not. Avodim are not metalzel.
So you're asking why is there a difference?
Yeah. And also, how do we understand the Rashbam?
You can ask them.
Both of them wander around.
The evidence stayed for 3 years would imply that he belongs there, whereas the sheep is controllable.
The sheep is controllable, and avodim is less controllable. So why should there be more of a chazaka by an eved?
Because if he's been there for 3 years and he hasn't gone back.
Oh, he hasn't gone back. Okay. Could be. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even if you say, I mean, the question is also why is there a distinction? How do you understand the Rashbam? I mean, what is the why should it be that after 3 years you have chazaka with avodim? Because he should have objected. Any ideas? Why should there be a distinction? Why should it be after 3 years you should suddenly have a chazaka with avodim? Why should we not be concerned that maybe it wanted it? Jeremy thinks because it could have wandered out again. Whether
Because if the evidence was yours, you'd know, you'd object.
But we're assuming,
Same as that.
we're assuming, we're assuming that he didn't object until 3 years. But the point is that the Eved did not move back.
the Eved did not move back.
If indeed the Machzik had taken the Eved by force, or the Eved had inadvertently wandered into his rishus,
Right.
you would have expected that within 3 years he would have,
You said something.
I said, escaped.
Mm.
Or
You think because it's like bigger, or it's more significant?
Is it not the same as that?
It is. It is. It is. It is.
Same as that.
It is. That's what we're saying. And in fact, I've got my notes here from many years ago. The Ritva apparently says that the Svar of the Rashbam is very simple. That the Rashbam holds that Chazal made a low plug. No distinction when it comes to Chazaka of Gimel Shonim. Chazaka of Gimel Shonim is Chazaka. That's it. 3 years you can establish Chazaka, right? Even for things that move around. Yeah, well, the Rashbam holds there's no difference whether sheep or vodim, whatever, right? Even though they move around, and the argument could be made that they wandered into your land, there's a low plug. Once you get to 3 years, you establish the same rules, even if they don't quite apply in the same way as land, because with land, you're in a stronger place, you should have objected. If I'm sitting in your land for 3 years, you should have objected. The fact you didn't is mine. Whereas here, you can say, well, you didn't establish any chazaka, it just wandered into your land. Nevertheless, we say a low plug 3 years. That's what we say, right? There is such an opinion. What is the Svar of the Vilna Gaon? What is the Svar of the Vilna Gaon? So the Gaon says that you can't have chazaka, or the Vilna Gaon is quoting the Shulchan Aruch, you can't have chazaka of 3 years if there's no shtar. The whole idea of 3 years was what? Yeah, because after 3 years we don't expect you to look after your shtar anymore, and therefore the fact that no one objected is a proof that you own it. But if there is no shtar, if people don't buy these things like animals with a shtar, right? That would be the difference. I'm trying to say that is the difference between an eved. I was asking, what is the difference between an eved and sheep? Eved has a shtar, of course. Eved is like hakos, is like land. So you buy evodim with a shtar. So therefore the svara of come 3 years, you have lost your shtar, therefore you can establish ownership. Remember that whole thing of the ketsos we use this as a we've got to support buyers. Buyers have to be defend. We have to defend and provide a solution for people who lose their documentation. Not everyone keeps the document. People don't keep the documents all the 3 years. But that all applies where there are documents, not where there aren't documents. Yeah.
So an eved is even more like that, whereas animals are not at all like that.
Well, you don't purchase animals with shtar.
Doesn't seem to be. There's no, you don't, but metaltalin in general, that means to say, okay, sheep, leave aside sheep, but just general chattel, people don't write, it's assumed that people don't create documents for. There's no documentation. It's not significant. No, but not necessarily. yeah. Well, yeah.
If you're in New Zealand, you're in New Zealand, you might have a quarter of a million sheep.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have each
Correct. Yeah,
name.
that's right. You never know they're gone.
You know,
You never know a documentary sheet.
yeah.
You have the money.
Yeah,
You wouldn't have a shop. No, you got money.
is blockchain considered a shtar?
Yeah. So Eved in Sarech Lechnisa Bevesa, you don't need to take yeah. There seems to be that seems to be That seems to be the distinction between the two. 1 second. Yeah.
It's the relevance of the star.
Yeah, it's the relevance of a star. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. That. It seems to be something along those lines. It seems to be something along those lines. That the idea that there is a difference between avodim, right? There is a difference between, according to the Rashbam, there's no difference. Rashbam just says that even things like whether it's sheep, whether it's avodim, yes, it's true that they can wander into your land, and that damages your claim a little bit. But once you get to 3 years, you can still turn around to them and say you should have objected, right? According to the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, as Gon says, no, the whole principle of 3 years is only relevant to things where there's a shtar. That's what we discussed. That's the whole idea of the shtar, right? That's the whole idea of 3 years. Because after 3 years, we're going to keep the shtar stuff. We kick in with our defense of you, right? And that only applies to things like avodim and land, right? That's the idea. That is the idea. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Well, let's carry on. Let's see if it.
Kidros still have chazaka after 3 years.
Yeah. Gorgeous. Yeah. They wander around.
Then why does the Mishnah not list?
That's a very good question. According to Rashbam, and the question is more than that, the Rishonim ask. According to the Rashbam, what is the chiddush of what's it called, of Reish Lakish?
Yeah.
Reish Lakish says Gojas don't have chazaka, but they do have chazaka after 3 years.
That's what I know.
What?
That's what I remember.
According to Rashbam, as understanding it exactly, then it should all be in the Mishnah. It should all be in the Mishnah. The Ramban asked your question, and Tosfos in Gittin Daf Pei. Because let's just see that Tosfos a second. Where's Gittin? I don't think there's a Gittin here. Every time there's only a few Masechtas missing, but it's always the one you want. There's not a full set here. It's always the one you want. It's not there. It's never been. You can find it. I think it's been searched for all across the shop. Someone obviously once wandered off with a few halakim. This is second, we just see if I can find it. Sure. Maybe it's not here. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure exactly where the Tosfos is. We'll have to. Anyway, he asked this question. Why should it be? Yeah, it goes to Matzah. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So yeah, that's a fair question according to the Rashbam.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
With Karka, we learnt that it doesn't have to be 3 full years.
Yes.
There might be scenarios where actually it's sort of a year straddles or a period of time either side.
Well, that's
machlokes. Yeah, machlokes, okay, but would those Rishonim, would the Tanaim who held that with land hold that with Avodim as well? Would there be a similar concept with Avodim that it doesn't have to be 3 full years?
It would be not. No, it's difficult. It's difficult to understand how that would
Yeah,
work.
no, that's what I'm asking. Because
the other opinions say that in the context of crops and things like that, where you can have 3 years. It's not necessarily miyom liyom. You can have 3 years, 3 crops or whatever, or 3 crop cycles or that type of thing. I don't see how that would apply to avodim. I'm not sure how that would apply.
Is there a way of expressing bias over an eved?
Is there a way of-
presumably if the Eved works for you, so in the same
Yeah,
way
the way
that
of
you
expressing
express
about
Pilus-
Eved doesn't work for you normally. That's true. That's definitely how you
Right.
establish ownership of an Eved. The Eved works for
Okay.
you. The Eved works for you normally. The Eved works for you normally, right? But there is a oh, that's where I saw it in the Kovet Shurim. Sorry, I feel like I'm getting a bit. There's a lot going on here. 1 second. The Kovet Shurim brings this point, which, and this is very actually. I'm pleased you brought this up. The Kovet Shurim says that he asked this question. The Tema, he says, the Talmud the Gimel Shonim, Humishim Tfim Gimel Shonim Mizanish B'Shtori. This is the question, right? More than 3 years. The whole reason is the star, right? Al Metalton is Labani Shtorin, Reshach Fal Tamzer. Doesn't apply to Metalton. That's the Chon Vassam's question. The whole, how can you, according to the Rambam Shulchan Aruch, we can understand. It's consistent. It's a very important point. This it's consistent, right? Avodim Karka. You'll see, Richie. I'm getting to a question in a second, right? Avodim Karka. It's all the same line. That you buy them with the star. After 3 years, you don't protect your star. Therefore, we have a protection mechanism in place 3 years. All makes sense. But somehow the Rashbam is making a jump and introducing 3 years in the context of sheep that people don't buy with a star. It's metaltalin. It is metaltalin. Big metaltalin. Yeah, movable. That's big sheep. But it's still metaltalin. You understand? So therefore, the whole principle doesn't apply. That's his question, right? So he says, "V'yesh lo'omar, the Rashbam Pirish came, b'hodim mishani b'gmor me'avodim, the toni b'masnisim." The Rashbam is explaining this on that which the Gemora says avodim in the Mishnah. The Mishnah Soveres, Talmud Gimel Shonim Mishum Yalef Mishar Amud, and the Mishnah is holds, the Mishnah itself holds that the reason of 3 years is because of that original reason we gave right at the beginning of the Perek, that you learn 3 years from the Shar Amud. Gimel ox, the ox which calls 3 times, therefore this is 3 times. Remember, totally different surah, nothing to do with the star. Just the idea of principle of 3 years and how that works, and you learn it from a posuk, you learn it from Shar Amud, you learn it from this whole thing from the goring ox, you learn it from the same thing as well. The Talmud de Rava Eino aliba de masnisim ela aliba de chachomim de pligi, and the reason of Rava, right? The reason of Rava is not going according to the Mishnah; it's going in the chachomim who dispute this. The Sfiru the Tzarech Gimel Shonim Yom Liyom. They hold you need 3 years from day to day. Okay. In other words, he's saying like this: according to the halacha, the Rashbam agrees that the rule of 3 years cannot apply to sheep. Can't apply it because we paskan like the chachomim that you need 3 years from day to day, 3 full years, right? Which is based on the idea of people only protect their shtaros for 3 complete years, which is obviously complete years. That's the whole logic. Yeah, you hold your shtar for 3 years. After 3 years, you don't hold your shtar anymore. Therefore, we protect you with the mechanism of chazaka, right? Then the Rashbam will, according to the halacha, the Rashbam agrees to that because if you la halacha, we hold need 3 complete years, and the reason of 3 complete years is to do with a shtar. Therefore, obviously, that's not relevant to sheep because there's no shtar with a sheep, right? So, in what sense does the Rashbam here say that flocks of sheep are the same as avodim? He's going specifically in this Gemara, which is explaining the Mishnah. The Mishnah lists avodim. The Mishnah lists avodim, and that is a different reason. That Mishnah, our Mishnah can hold. He says the reason of like Shar Amur just 3 times. I don't understand why it's a different reason. Because there's a question discussed at the very beginning of the parak as to what the idea of 3 years is. Is it a svara? Is it a logic? Or is it learned from a posuk? Right? Where does he get 3 years? Why 3 years? What's 3? What's 3 got to do with anything? And he originally suggested that you could learn it from a shar hamur, just like you see that our ox falls after 3 times. That changes its status. That's hazaka, right? That changes status. It's assumed to be a non-goring ox. And once it's gored 3 times, it's assumed to be a goring ox. This is a dangerous animal. And we wanted to suggest the same thing with ownership. Right? After 3 times or 3 years or whatever, there's an assumption that a field is now yours. The Gemara didn't like that race, right? But he's suggesting that is still a valid explanation of the of the Mishnah, right? Of the Mishnah, and therefore that is why you can have in that reason where it doesn't have anything to do with a shtar. There is a logic to say, right, that 3 times, even with something that moves or doesn't have a shtar like metaltlin, you could establish chazaka. That's the argument. That is the possible argument. And that's why he says, that you can have 3 years even with what's it called? Even with sheep. Yeah, even with sheep. It's a bit difficult in the sense that he's saying that Rava is not the same as the Mishnah.
But the Gemora starts like that. The Gemora starts with the Amar Reish Lakish.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why? And he's talking about greatness, so why would that even be a kasha? So it must be that it's implied that's kind of being
that it's got the same status, you mean, as avodah?
It's got something that's connected. We're talking about
Yeah. We're comparing the two. Yes, absolutely. We're comparing the two. And that's why the solution to say that the solution it resolves both of them, at least in the Mishnah, makes sense. Right? That's why the Rashbam wants to go down that route. That applies to both of them. It's difficult to say that you split the two. The problem is that the logic of shtar doesn't apply to one or the other, this is why you have to learn in this different way. 1 second. So the Gamma is really time with the Rava. Yeah, and then therefore he just goes on to say that that's the Rashbam. The Rashbam will say that the Mishnah is learning like the Shor Hamud reason, and do with shtar, and therefore in the Mishnah we can explain that avodim and sheep and everything else can all be the same as the 3 year thing. But the others who dispute the Rashbam, like he brings the Rif, but there's also presumably the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, etc. They hold that when Rava says that the Mishnah also goes like the same reason of Rava, and therefore when it says 3 years, it's only talking about avodim and not Godrus. It's only talking about avodim. The conclusion of Rabbi Elchanan is very important because his conclusion is that lahalacha, therefore, there's no machlokas between the Rashbam and everyone else, because since lahalacha we hold like Rava, right? Therefore, and we hold that it's 3 years and it's based on a shtar, the Rashbam will agree that we now reduce the concept of 3 years only to things where there's a shtar, right? And therefore, we will exclude Godrus. The problem with that, of course, is the Maggid Mishnah does bring the Rashbam lahalacha that chazaka with sheep you can also have after 3 years, and we saw that in the Ramah. So obviously others dispute, disagree with this. So okay, now we'll spend a long time on this. So let's continue with the baby Eved. Anyway, so that's the machlokas. So just to sum up very simply what we've said, we had a question from the Mishnah. Question on the Mishnah: how can you say avodim have chazaka? Surely they wander around, they can move your property, definitely have no chazaka. According to Rashbam, the resolution of the Gemora is Rava says no chazaka immediately. We have chazaka after 3 years. No reason you can't have chazaka after 3 years, and therefore that's our Mishnah. Avodim have chazaka after 3 years. Okay, according to Rashbam, only avodim. According to Rashbam, avodim and sheep after 3 years, as we've just tried to somehow kind of resolve. And according to other Rishonim, it's only avodim and not sheep, right? Okay. Omar Rava says another statement. If you have a baby eved in a crib, you can establish chazaka immediately. It says, well, pshita, obviously, why not? It's a movable item, it's a chattel, right? Baby eved is a chattel.
Can't crawl out and run around.
No, it's in a crib. In a crib. That's the operative word. 3-month-old baby. Can't move. Except for crying and right. So what's a pshita? Obviously I can establish chazaka. If I've got a baby eved in my house, prove it's yours. So the crazy it's necessary to isli imo. The baby eved has a mother. The thing, what might you think? You might think that it's actually a movable eved, and the mother carried the baby into the house, and therefore I've got no proof of ownership. And it comes to us, the mother doesn't forget her son.
Exactly, babies go with the mother.
Babies go with the mothers, and as a mother would never forget her son. So if the mother
Whatever the status of the mother, things like that.
No, but the point is, I've got in my house the baby,
But not the mother.
not the mother.
Oh, but not the mother.
Yeah. So the baby must be mine
Oh, I see.
because the mother wouldn't be separate from the baby. In other words, you might think that this Eved is a movable Eved. You might think this Eved does have legs and can walk. How can the Eved walk? It's a baby. It's 3 months old. The answer is because the mother schleps it around. Yeah, right. And if that's the case, there's no chazaka. Because again, it's godrous, it's movable, it's moving around, it's walking around. Maybe someone put it in your house, maybe it came in by itself. It can't come by itself, it's a baby, but its mother brought it in. The answer is no. Kamash Malan, we don't say that. Why not? Because it's not with its mother now. And mothers don't forget their kids, generally.
So what is this? So where's the mother?
Oh, exactly. Where's the mother? Where's the mother? No, that's the point. There's no mother here. And therefore what? That's proof that I own the baby.
Oh, yeah.
It's
It's
a
a
lot
baby
of
Eved.
cotton.
It's starting off as
Yeah, it's a baby.
It's cotton, not tinner.
Yeah, but it's because that's what it says. No, because it's a mutal ba'arisa. You're right. Had he not specified mutal ba'arisa, arisa is a crib. That you're right. Hey, cotton would be any age, but any child age. But it says mutal ba'arisa. That's why it adds the words avi mutal ba'arisa to tell you that we're talking about baby. Exactly. What was that? Yeah.
And you can't argue with the facts of the case, but it's a strange fact that you're even arguing about a child in the first place.
Why? I want to know. It's very worth a lot of money. A baby, yes. Sell it on the slave market, a lot of money.
But that suggests that someone could have
So how'd you come to
kidnapped the
that?
child. It's that valuable.
No, I'm claiming ownership.
You're saying that
I'm claiming ownership. You are claiming. You knock on my door and you say to me, you say that baby Eved, who one day will be worth a lot of money, is mine. And I say, prove it. And you say to me, you've got no chazaka because the baby's a baby that would have been with its mother, and the mother would have brought it into a house, and the mother probably walked away somewhere then. And I say, the mothers don't do that. Mothers don't leave their kids.
That's true, but if the value of the baby is very high, which obviously is, so then you might think that the allegation might be, well, actually, you kidnapped the baby rather than.
But prove
the
it.
mother.
Prove it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine, no problem. Prove it.
Right.
Yeah. But the Motzei Mechaber of a raya applies here because it can't go by itself.
Right.
You're going to tell me it did go by itself. How did it go by itself? Because its mother schleps around everywhere. But then where's the mother? Mother's gone. That proves that. And the mothers don't do that. Mothers don't do that. They don't abandon their kids in random people's houses. Usually.
Oh.
Right? Now, look at the Rashbam. Omar Rava, Evet Kanani Koton, a Mutal Barisa, halfway through where it's wide. Yeah? Omar Rava, Evet Kanani Koton, a Mutal Barisa, a baby Evet Kanani that is in a crib. Yesh lechazok al-altim. Hechazik by echod, if someone is made a chazok on it, literally took hold of it, for Omar and he said, I bought it. Ne'eman, he's believed. Since the baby cannot walk. But no Dominic Godrus. And it's not comparable to flocks of sheep that walk around. The Gami Nostri al-Hashir al-Haskin, you don't usually rent it out or lend it out or anything else like that. Don't do these things with baby avodim. Pshitas and Gemora, it's obvious. The Vadam Yatzma leholach, he can't go in by itself. The Gemora says the Aile Imei, it's got a mother. So what might you think? Maybe the mother brought it in. The Eved maybe that the mother of that Eved brought it into the house of the person being machzik all the time, brought the Eved inside the house. The Gemara says, so maybe the mother forgot the baby there, the hashtahainu godrus. That is godrus, because the mother could have walked in with it, right? So Gemara says, no, we don't say that because Kamash Malan, that a mother doesn't forget the child. And because a mother doesn't forget the child, therefore, it's assumed that it must be yours. Okay? And that's what the Shulchan Aruch paskins, that last bit of halacha that we didn't do before. It's a child that can't walk. It's like other chattels. Chazaka immediately. Even if it's got a mother, even if it's got a mother who walks in and out of the house, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because that's not considered to be walking of its own accord. The mother will not forget the child. Yes, and therefore, And therefore, the fact that you have you have two choices here. There are two possible explanations as to why this Eved is in your house. Either because it's yours, that's one option.
Your child? No, from where?
What do you mean from where?
Where's the child coming
You had
from?
it, you bought it, or you had it, or you had an Eved that gave birth, and he gave birth to it, and now it's your Eved.
So the mother is there then?
No, that's option two. Plausible option two as to how this Eved got to your house, which is what the other guy wants to say, is that this Eved's not yours at all. And you know that lady who keeps visiting her friend, because Avodim have friends as well. So she's visiting her Eved friend, and she has this baby, and that's her baby. And that Eved happens to be my Eved, and this was her baby, and she brought it into your house, and it's my Eved. In other words, it's Godrus. It wandered in and out. On that, I can respond with a knockout blow. And that is, if this Eved belonged to your Eved, right, it wouldn't leave it in my house. You don't leave babies in people's houses. And that's a proof that it's mine. I know this all sounds a little bit abstract because we're dealing with human beings. What? It's not really relevant. in the halachic discourse of the sugya, it's not relevant. Of course, it's relevant. It's not relevant in this concept, this halacha. We're trying to establish who owns the baby. I can tell you that you don't. You, who's knocking on my door and trying to prove that you own it because you own this woman, this mother, and the mother was, or even if you didn't own the mother, but you're trying to say it's Godrus, it wanders in and out, therefore you've got no proof of ownership, etc. Forget it. Forget that. Where's the mother? I don't know.
Is there a time period? Is there a time period? Sorry.
What?
Like babysitting for a night.
Babysitting.
I mean, would one night be enough to establish this whole debate?
Immediately chazaka immediately. Any metaltalin that you have in your house, right? Unless I can prove that it's mine, our assumption is that it's yours. So it's chazaka immediately.
Sometimes people babysit for a night.
But they wouldn't do that. We're assuming they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that. A mother wouldn't leave her little baby in someone else's house. It's a fair point, but that's not enough to challenge. That is not enough of an explanation. That's why there's only two possibilities here.
I was going to say that sometimes you have low lane of this thing when they're driving in the car, and sometimes they get out of the car, and sometimes.
Yeah. All right, but that's unusual. We don't again. We go with the reasonable.
No, I'm saying.
So it's not it's unusual. No. Jeremy's talking about Hassan people who forget their babies in cars. Of course, it can happen, but it's people don't do that, right? It's not the norm. It's not normal. Yeah, exactly. It's not normal behavior. Of course, does a mother never forget her? You know. Yeah.
Maybe it's slightly different values.
Why? No, we're talking about human nature. A mother would not forget the child. Listen, every Canania have rules as well as to how they're treated and looked after. Again, we have to look at this as I said last week, we have to look at this in a pure halachic terminology, right? No, we just have to look at it as based on the criteria that we're evaluating it in a halachic sense. How do we see this? Gemora, there were certain goats. There were goats, and what do these goats do? So these goats, the ochlu chushla b'nahar, they were eating peeled barley in nahar do. Now the thing is, the thing is that the Osa Mori Duchmori Chushla, the owner of the barley, came along and Tofsinu, and he took hold of them. He took hold of the goats. Now, goats remember Godrus. And he was claiming a fortune of money. He was saying that these goats ate a huge amount, right, beyond even their own value. And he's saying that I'm keeping them. Okay. We don't know how much they ate. We've got no idea how much they ate. He's claiming these goats as payment for what the damage they've done to his field. So Omar Avur the Shmuel, the father Shmuel, came along and said, he's allowed to claim up to the value of the goat, so no more. Simple logic, amigo. He could have said that he owns them, the goats. They're in his field. Right? And because he could have said he owns them, therefore he's believed to say that they consumed his crops up to their value. Why? Because if he was lying, he'd say something better. He'd say, I own the goats. That's a better lie than saying I don't know the goats, but I'm claiming them. But they're foreign goats that ate my crops, and therefore you understand? That's a migo, right? That's a migo, yeah. Migo, you could have said a better lie, which is that I just own the goats. You're believed to say that I don't own the goats, but they ate all my crops up to their value or more, and therefore I'm allowed to. So up to that, he's allowed to keep them. Says the more obvious question based on what we've just learned, which is why we're bringing this here. For Hamarik Shlokish at Godrus Ein Lahem Chazaka. That Godrus that wander around, flocks of sheep, there's no Chazaka. So the Migo falls away. You can't say Migo, since I could have said that I own them. How can you say I own them? Sheep that wander into your field, Ein Chazaka, then Ein Chazaka, there's no Chazaka. Right?
Yes.
So the Gemora says, Shani Izi, goats are different to Masira Laraya, because they're handed over to a shepherd. They're in the domain of a shepherd, even though they want their flocks, right? Since the shepherd looks after them, because they do a lot of damage if they're not in the hand of a shepherd, okay? Therefore, no one could take hold of them whilst they're on the way, on a road, and they don't wander into sheep because they're being looked after by a shepherd. And as a result, you can establish chazaka, because it's like a baby eved. It's like a baby eved, doesn't move by itself. So it's regular metaltalin. The Gemara says, "Vo'ekot safra panya." There's morning and evening. In the morning and evening, the goats would wander down to the shepherd's house by themselves. So that time they could have wandered into your field, or in the evening on the way back. So the Gemara says, "Benahardor tai shchichi." In Nahardor, Arab bandits are common. And therefore they never let them out the sight of the sheep rustlers. What? Sheep rustlers. Are they called rustlers? Rustlers, sheep rustlers. Out of the sight of the shepherd. You'd give them straight to the shepherd in the morning, and you'd collect your goats from the shepherd in the evening. And therefore, goats in the Hardor, where this story took place, are not godrus. They are like other chattels. Yeah. Okay, let's see Rashbam, sorry. Honey is the chushlas, urim klufim, peeled barley. Shenichnasu b'sada, they entered the field of a roll, and they saw that produce which was spread out there for the to be benefit from the sun. The Chaim alon, and we hold shen wherever sila olam. Shen, that means damage caused by an animal eating something, is always muad. That means they always pay nezek sholim. It's muad means it's always assumed to cause that damage, right? It's not. There's no tam. There's no chatzi nezek and all that, right? The chihav yobirashus nezek, and when the consumption of food, which is what the animal eats food, right, takes place birashus hanezek, in the domain of the person being damaged. The halacha is nezek sholem meshalemes. You have to pay the full value, full whack. Nezek sholem. But there's no witnesses here as to whether the sheep ate a little, the goats ate a little bit or a lot. We don't know. The term Bala Soda, but the owner of the field claims the Bala Soda, the owner of the field, says that these goats ate a huge amount, more even than they are worth, than their own value. And what happened was Avur de Shmuel said they can claim up to their value. Of the goats. My time, what's the reason? Since the owner of the field could say that he bought them, because he's holding them, the goats, when he be believed. When he also says they ate such and such an amount, the Chaim alon, okay, full stop. When he says they ate such and such an amount, when he's believed. The Gemora says, the Chaim alon says the Rashbam, the Chaim alon hai mehemon b'shvua. We hold that this believed is only has to make an oath. He has to make a shua. I think it's a shua drabanan, like we saw in the Shulchan Aruch, right? He has to make a shua. But more than their value, the leko migo, there's no migo because he more than their value. The migo, whole migo was I could have said I own them. It's only on their value, right? So the more than their value, lo mehemon ela be'edim. He's only believed with witnesses. Brings witnesses. That's something else. Okay. So we're asked, how can he claim up to their value? There is no migo. Because he can't say that he bought them because they're godrus. You with me? They wander around. So therefore you've got no migo. Your whole migo is, since I could have said I own them, they're my property and I'd be believed. Like all metaltalin, chazaka immediately. That doesn't apply. They're godrus. They wander around. You don't think so, Paul? You don't like
Why does he have to say that I acquired them immediately? Why is the immediacy of acquisition relevant? They're just my goats.
Prove that. What do you mean they're your goats? I'm saying they're not your goats.
No, but he's saying they're just my goats.
But I'm saying they're not.
In the it's an amigo.
No, but the amigo can only work if I would be believed. If I would be believed to say they're mine. And when am I going to believe they say they're mine? Again, we're not talking about 3 years or anything like that. When I'm going to, only if I can establish chazaka la'alta immediately. How am I going to establish chazaka immediately? Only if it's defined as metaltalin. Right? Good. You understand? Why? Amigo is a logical argument that proves ownership. I am saying no one knows how much the goats consumed. No one knows. No one knows, right? I am telling you that I know. I own the field, and I know these goats cause a huge amount of damage. And they ate much more than they're even worth. So avoid more passing like this. The goats are sitting in your property. They have a din metaltin, the chattels. So you could say they're your goats. And no one could challenge that. They have to prove it. They weren't your goats. So since you could say that, you're believed up to their value. The same thing you could say, since I could say they were mine, therefore I'm believed to say that they consumed up to their own value, because that's a migay, right? If I was lying, that gives you credibility. If I was lying, I would just say I own them, and I'd get them out anyway, right? Only up to their value. The Gemora challenges that and says, how could you ever, the migay falls away because you can't claim ownership because they're godrous. The answer is, says the Gemara, right? Shani Izzy, goats are different to other goats, the godrous, even though they're flocks, they're given them a serial roya, because they're handed over to shepherds. They're more dangerous than rams and sheep, apparently. And no one can be machzik on them. No one can take hold of them on the journey because the shepherd looks after them. That's why they have chazaka.
Because of the listing, or is it because they cause a lot of damage?
They cause a lot of damage. That's why.
But should that be enough of a reason why he should be believed without?
No, because that's not proof that they cause damage in your property here. It's not proof they cause damage in your property. It's not proof. It's not proof they cause damage. The point is that they're handed over to a shepherd because they do cause damage, right? And therefore, that's why if they're in my property, I can assume that they didn't get there by wandering in. The more ask why could safra shaholchim in the morning they go by themselves. They know the way apparently from the owner until the shepherd. Opanya in the evening. No, you've never seen it. You've never seen animals. They know what to do. But yeah, Opanya in the evening. The shepherd brings them from the field until in the city, inside the city in the evening. And everyone goes by itself to the house of the owner's house. One says because they're a tai, Yishmaelim Ganovim, thieving Yishmaelim. That's what it says. They give them over from hand to hand. From the hand of the owners to the hand of the shepherds, shachris in the evening, from the hand of the shepherds to the hand of the owner in the evening. And they never go by themselves. They never go alone. And therefore they are considered taltin. That's why I have a good migay. And that's why Avodah Shmuel said, you are believed when you say that they consumed X amount. You're not believed they consumed like much more than their value because you've got no migay in that. But up to their value, you have a migay. That's what you'll be believed. Right? Pardon? Yeah. Okay, very good. So there's one more shift for Pesach next week, and that will be the last one for Pesach. Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay.